They say the Middle East is complicated. That's a polite lie we tell ourselves while ignoring the simpler truth. A lot of the mess is boringly predictable. People arm militias. The state keeps pretending it's asleep, and then someone outside the arrangement shows up and reboots the chaos. Today's episode: Israel sends troops into southern Lebanon. Lebanon screams sovereignty. Hezbollah shrugs like a flatmate who's been left to guard the stove. And the rest of us watch the inevitable argument about who invited whom to the war. A municipal worker named Ibrahim Salameh is killed in Blida during an Israeli raid, a body that will not be sanded down by diplomacy. That's why Lebanon's president told the army to confront any Israeli incursion. And let's be blunt, if your territory is turned into a launchpad by a terrorist organisation, don't be surprised when the neighbours decide to play pest control. This isn't sympathy for boots on the ground, it's a fact about cause and effect. Borders are not moral suggestion boxes. If rockets are being fired from locations under your government's watch, or worse, from locations where non-state actors operate with impunity, then foreign states will at some point decide they prefer direct action to diplomatic notes that end up in the recycling bin. Now, before any moral grandstanding begins, yes, an incursion is an incursion. Sovereignty is a thing. Civilians die. That's horrific and stupid, and everyone should be ashamed when it happens. But let's not act surprised that when a group is embedded in a country and using that country as a platform for cross-border attacks, the target of those attacks will eventually opt for kinetic answers. The only reason this logic becomes controversial is because human beings prefer simple moral narratives to messy strategic ones. Villain, victim, hero. Real life gives you awkward overlaps and messy alliances, and your moral clarity dissolves like sugar in tea. Let's inspect the Lebanese failing here without dressing it up in excuses. Lebanon has long been in political limbo, a caretaker government, a fractured parliament, and an army that sits somewhere between a national institution and a bystander at a fight. Hezbollah, meanwhile, has been both a political party and an armed network, a hybrid that allowed it to accumulate influence while operating a parallel militia. That arrangement made certain people rich in rhetoric and others rich in armaments. The result? A state that looks sovereign on diplomatic brochures, but in practice tolerates, enables, or is simply unable to constrain an armed group whose primary job description is, "We will fight Israel, sometimes with your land as the stage." That contradiction isn't dramatic, it's catastrophic. Here's the core argument, naked and unapologetic. Lebanon must choose. You can either be a functioning state that enforces monopoly over violence, or you can be a competitive marketplace where licensed fighters sell bullets for political capital. You cannot be both and expect your national borders to be respected. When a state colludes with, tolerates, or is powerless against a group that fires rockets across a border, it forfeits some of its diplomatic moral high ground. That's not a permission slip for foreign invasion, but it is the reality that invites intervention. If you assemble a gang in your living room and then complain when a neighbour storms in with a broom, you might want to audit your life choices. Don't hand me that Hezbollah defends Lebanon, chestnut, as if it were a universal truth. If you are defending the country, do the work of a state, integrate, regulate, disarm the parts that operate like a private army. Use the political process. Take guns away from anyone who is not subject to civilian oversight, or fails spectacularly at sovereignty, and watch as your territory becomes an argument between bigger powers. Lebanon's president ordering the army to confront incursions is, on the surface, a soundbite for sovereignty, but it also exposes the ridiculous irony. The army is being asked to confront foreign troops while standing in the shadow of a domestic militia whose rockets keep starting the whole show. It's like asking the bouncer to throw out the person who keeps calling the police on the party when the party has its own private security force that the bouncer isn't allowed to touch. Now let's talk consequences, which is to say, the boring arithmetic of violence. If cross-border fire continues, escalation is inevitable. If escalation continues, civilians die in larger numbers, refugee flows spike, and local infrastructure peels off like old paint. The region doesn't reset into a fairer equilibrium because someone takes out a militia. Instead, violence begets violence, and the political costs of rebuilding peace grow exponentially. So yes, there's an argument to be made for preemptive targeted removals of launch sites in order to prevent broader war. There's also an argument to be made that uncoordinated, heavy-handed operations are a straight path to a regional conflagration. Both these statements are true at once, annoyingly for people who love single-sentence moral certainties. But let's not pretend Hezbollah is a symptom rather than a cause. It's not only defensive rhetoric, it's also strategic positioning. Hezbollah chose a strategy that blends social services with militia rule, giving it a civic facade that complicates any effort to neutralize it without inviting popular backlash. That's cynical genius. Do the charity work, wear the mask of resistance, accumulate legitimacy while building a military wing. The political class that either depends on or fears Hezbollah's muscle has fewer incentives to challenge it. That political cowardice is the real infrastructure of violence, a scaffold that keeps militias in business. If you actually want to end cross-border rockets, you have to dismantle the scaffold, not just bark about borders when someone else comes to sweep the floor. Let me be clear about something else. Being skeptical of state failure does not equal endorsing foreign aggression. There's moral distance between understanding why an outside power might act and applauding every missile that lands. We should be angry at the logic that creates these cycles, angry at the politicians who profit from chaos, and angrier still at the international community for the way it normalizes crumbling sovereignty. But cynicism without a policy prescription is just performance art. So here's a policy prescription that doesn't require telescopes to see. Lebanon must rein in non-state military actors, the Lebanese army must be given the tools and political cover to do its job, and international actors must support rebuilds that make the cost of sitting on a cache of rockets higher than the benefit. If that sounds easy, congratulations, you deserve a medal for optimism. It's not, it's structural and painful. To disentangle an armed political organization from a state is to take on networks of patronage, corruption, and social reliance. You have to replace the militia's social services with real services that are transparent and effective. You also have to prosecute the people who enrich themselves off instability. That requires domestic political courage, and often international patience. The kind the world rarely offers when a scapegoat is easy and a complicated state reform is boring. We also need to call out a pernicious hypocrisy. The reflexive blanket claim that Israel has no right to target Hezbollah ignores one important reality: states have the right to defend their citizens. If a militia launches rockets and hides among civilians on your neighbour's soil, that neighbour will try to stop it. You can argue about proportionality, about civilian protection, about international law, all valid and worthy debates, but you cannot erase the underlying fact that repeated hostilities prompt defensive action. Saying no foreign boots while tolerating militia rockets is a rhetorical dodge. If you want no foreign boots, stop the rockets. If you can't or won't, you will find yourself with a lot of moral indignation and a lot less control over what happens next. Take a breath. I'm not advocating for reckless escalation or the moral flattening that says any action is fine if you dislike the actor. I am pointing out that agency matters. Lebanon, its politicians, its elites, its civil society has agency. It chose again and again to allow the conditions that let armed non-state actors thrive. That choice has consequences. If you lay down with terrorists, you will eventually wake up with foreign armies carrying out missions on your soil. That reality is ugly and unfair, but it's not mystical. It's arithmetic and politics. So what do we want from Lebanon? Firstly, the army needs a political mandate and material support to actually secure sovereign territory. That means leadership who will risk the domestic political fallout of confronting militias, and yes, that is dangerous, but the alternative is slow death by attrition. Secondly, Hezbollah and other armed groups must be integrated into a political and legal framework that denies them a monopoly on violence. If that requires international mechanisms, fine, bring them in. But the key is to remove the incentives that keep militias armed. Patronage networks, absence of services, and the glamorization of resistance as a social business model. For Israel, and I know how heated that sentence will read in some comment sections, there is a case for targeted operations against launch infrastructure and against commanders who plan cross-border attacks, but targeted does not mean lawless, it means precise. It means trying, where possible, to avoid civilian casualties and crippling the social fabric of communities. There is a world in which deterrence can be a tool rather than a pretext, make the cost of firing rockets higher than the perceived political gains. That's not poetry, it's strategy. It's the difference between trying to win hearts and minds and trying to win the battle of attrition. The latter sucks for everyone except the arms dealers. And to the international bystanders who cheer from afar, the moral clarity of distance is addictive. But if you want stability, invest in rebuilds, in governance, in mediation that has teeth. Military interventions without long-term political projects are like tearing weeds without fixing the soil. You can burn the bush, but the seeds, the conditions for militias to arise, will remain unless you address the root causes. Finally, people will call this piece cold, or pro-interventionist, or naively realpolitik. Fine. Call it pragmatic realism, coated in righteous frustration. We can mourn the victims of Bleeder, condemn incursions, and still insist that Lebanon get its act together. Those truths are not mutually exclusive. They are layered like a terrible, combustible cake. The only way out is to eat it strategically, cut out the rotten layers, rebuild the recipe, and stop pretending the oven isn't on fire. I want to end with a simple sentence because simple sentences are underrated. If you value sovereignty, you must defend it from the inside first. If you value the lives of civilians, you must remove the reason foreign states think kinetic options are their best tools. If you want peace, you must be willing to be boring and brave, boring in the sense of steady governance, brave in the sense of confronting your own violent patrons. Anything else is either a feel-good slogan or a prelude to more headlines with the same tragic names. Not right, not left, just real.
Rent a vibe. Don't fix your life, just rent the illusion of stability.
Comes with one house plant and a vision board with zero follow-through.